Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Roald Dahl Retrospective, where we take a look at adaptations on Roald Dahl shorts and books. I am Patricia.
My name is Arun.
And we have ourselves a very special guest with us. You may know him as the Hero of Tomorrow on YouTube. We have Eli Stone. Welcome, Eli.
Good to be here.
So today we're going to be discussing about the 1996 animated Disney film James and the Giant Peach, based off of the 1961 novel of the same name.
Yeah, and so this movie to me is a bit of an anomaly, and also it was one I thought I was not going to be able to get to see because for those of you who do not know, I signed up for the 7-day trial to Disney Plus to actually go watch this movie specifically, only to find that the British version of Disney Plus does not have this movie.
Which is kind of ironic considering that, Roald Dahl is from Britain, and you would expect that an animated adaptation of a British book would be in Disney Plus for Britain, but they don't.
You know what I think it might be, and this is just a hunch, but I think probably because they probably might have to go through classifications and things like that for stuff that's appearing on major streaming platforms. Maybe they're probably still having to go through that. So maybe somewhere down the line it will turn up when the British Board of Film Classification allows it to go through.
Okay, that's fair. So right before we discuss about this movie, so Eli, what was your first introduction to any Roald Dahl adaptation?
A little bit of a correction there. Roald Dahl isn't from Britain. He actually was born in Norway, but he grew up in England. So that's
right.
So that's close. So that's close to it. Which I know because when I was a kid, after seeing both this and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, I was pretty much obsessed with Roald Dahl's work to the point where I even read his first autobiography. And as a kid, I rarely read autobiographies. And his first autobiography, Boy Tales of Childhood, which I wouldn't really recommend to read if you're a kid because Dahl didn't exactly have a horrible life, but he lived in a time period before a lot of things that we take for granted these days, like anesthesia.
Yeah.
Because there are a couple of really graphic scenes in this book which kind of scarred me as a kid. But like I said, I really did enjoy a lot of Dahl's work when I was growing up. I read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, pretty much anything that was getting an adaptation at the time. And then I started going through his other books. I could probably legitimately call myself a lifelong Roald Dahl fan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is great because the guest that we had last time discussing about Four Rooms had little to no experiences with Roald Dahl, except for the movie we're going to be talking about today. So that's awesome. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Here we go. So yes, James and the Giant Peach was the very first animated movie in 7 years since the Cosgrove Hall adaptation of the BFG that came out in 1989. So Roald Dahl did not want to see an adaptation of James and the Giant Peach. I guess because he was just so frustrated with how they did their movie adaptations. We already talked about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and The Witches. The only ones he was really satisfied with were Danny the Champion of the World and the BFG. So after his death, it turned out that Lissy Dahl was more enthusiastic with other adaptations of his books. She wanted to respect her husband's legacy. So Disney approached Lissy Dahl with a proposal to adapt James and the Giant Peach, and she was very happy with it. And she was even happy with the final product, saying that the portrayal of James would have been something that Roald Dahl would have been really proud of. Unfortunately, the movie went through some issues, especially when it came to marketing. When the movie came out in 1996, it was a financial failure. It only made $28 million out of a $38 million budget. And 1996 wasn't exactly a stellar year for animation either. There were only 4 animated movies that came out that year. There was Hunchback of Notre Dame, Space Jam, if you want to kind of count that, sure. Then there was Beavis and Butthead Do America. And then in Japan, there was a Doraemon movie. So, and then everything else was like direct to video. So, yeah, it was kind of like a lackluster year for animated movies.
Yeah, and you know what the most incredible thing about this is? This currently holds a 91% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, but if you look at the fan reception for it, it actually only holds a 66%. So if there's a massive difference between what the audience wanted to go see and what the critics wanted to go see out of this movie. So it doesn't surprise me that I thought all the positive reviews would have at least lifted some of the budgeting up for people to go see it. But no, I'm really surprised that a lot of people look at this movie and do not see what everyone else was kind of hollering about in the newspapers.
Yeah, and then there's 2 reasons for that. Number one, for those who may not know, James and the Giant Peach, the book, was actually banned in some states. Places such as Texas and Florida and Virginia, they had various reasons on why they banned these books. In fact, I'm going to link a website in the description box below called bandlibrary.com. And I'm going to read off some of the reasons on why that James and the Giant Peach was banned. I'm just going to read off just a couple of examples. So 1991, Florida, challenged at Deep Creek Elementary School, not appropriate reading material for young children. 1995, Virginia, challenge at Stafford County School for crude language and encourages children to disobey authority. The book was removed from classrooms and placed in the library where it is incredibly restricted. 1999, Texas, banned from an elementary school in Lufkin for containing the word ass. 1999, Wisconsin, spider licking her lips could be sexual. 1992, this is actually one of my favorites. Challenge at the Morton Elementary School Library at Brooksville because it promotes drug and whiskey and has a foul word, which the foul word was ass. And Hernando County, Florida. A woman in Hernando County, Florida, took issue with Grasshopper's statement, "I'd rather be fried alive and eaten by a Mexican," as well as references to snuff, tobacco, and whiskey. Her complaints to her 10-year-old daughter's school principal led to reveal by the Region School Board. So, yeah, in addition to the witches, James and the Giant Peach was not liked by librarians in school. So maybe there were a lot of children who were not familiar with James and the Giant Peach, and maybe not a lot of them went to see it. The second reason, I think, is because there was a bit of a stigma of who was behind it. So let's talk about Henry Selick. Henry Selick was the director of The Nightmare Before Christmas, and Tim Burton produced it. I remember that those 2 names were huge in the advertisement. You have to understand that, Nightmare Before Christmas around the early to mid 90s was still seen as like a cult classic. It wouldn't be until like a few years later in which it became the mainstream phenomenon that we would know of today. So, I mean, Tim Burton was still kind of like, still known, but he was still kind of like in his doldrum days where he was like directing a few movies that didn't exactly do very well in the box office. And Henry Selick, I mean, he's one of those examples about quality over quantity because in addition to this, he only directed a handful of movies. There was Monkey Bone, which came out a few years later, and then there was Coraline. So
with Tim Burton, like his vision necessarily wasn't to kind of like be mainstream and like end up like making a movie company loads of money. He had like this artistic vision that he wanted to express and wanted to express in his own way. So I think his main goal was not to obviously make a ton of money. I think his goal was basically to just bring his vision of what he saw basically to a screen basically for I think his own pleasure, and I think for the pleasure of a few other people. But keep in mind, like he did Ed Wood, which was a biopic on like one of the worst directors of all time.
Which that movie was a financial failure as well.
Exactly, yeah. So I don't think his goal, going into this was necessary to make $1 million and live like a king. I think his thing was just to be like, hey, there's this artistic vision that I have, and this is what I want to do. And don't get me wrong, it's I'm not saying that Tim Burton is like, I do understand like people like, Miyazaki can like, create something and create a ton of money out of it, but there's a lot of people that isn't what they want to do. They want to just create something that is kind of weird and kind of kooky and wants to basically put their own spin on something.
Well, I mean, since this is like 1996, I wouldn't be surprised if this would have been the point in which he was like helping direct the Superman movie that never came out.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. So yeah, I'm actually curious for people who are like listening in when it comes to like the discussion of James and the Giant Peach. I think that in my opinion, if this movie would have been a bigger hit, I would have been surprised if we would have seen a lot more adaptations by Roald Dahl. It wouldn't be until another 20 years later until we got the live action BFG movie.
So like well, mind you, like if you had to, I wouldn't say that was a great payoff, but it's with James and the Giant Peach, you had, going on to the movie itself, obviously you have a very very bizarre setup, and you can definitely tell that Tim Burton has got his fingers all over this. Like, you start off with this kind of like, very sweet setting, which obviously looks kind of storybookish with James throwing stones into the water, and then you have this whole kind of like picturesque thing with his mother and father saying, "Oh, hey, look at the clouds, and look, they all look like something, and one of these days we're going to go to New York, and we're going to sail there, and be happy and everything like that." And then all of a sudden he goes into like this dark, kind of really, really weird moment of like saying, "Oh, hey, this rhinoceros came over and gobbled up his mother and father, and now he has to go live with his crazy aunts, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker." So like, right off the bat, you're in for a bit of a wild ride.
Mm-hmm.
From the very beginning of it all. And by the way, like, for those of you who do not know, Miriam Margoyles and Joanna Lumley play Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker, respectively.
Yes. And so basically it starts off like your typical Roald Dahl story where we have a kid who's like really timid yet optimistic, and he goes through a tragic backstory, and he's abused by his caretakers, and then a whole bunch of magic ensues, and he goes on this epic adventure, and then he finds happiness. Where have we heard that before?
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Ding ding, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Danny the Champion of the World, The Witches. I'm noticing a pattern. Like, even the characters are the same thing, the timid yet optimistic character.
Yeah, here's the thing about this situation. Like, you're going to make your character somewhat relatable, and, Danny the Champion of the World is somewhat relatable to a kid audience. Charlie Bucket is also relatable, and also we've got our main character here, who also has to be, pretty relatable too. So, at the end of the day, like, you can get, of course, if you're going to be marketing or writing a story which is predominantly going to be written by children, you're probably better off having your main protagonist be a child himself.
Yeah, that's true. It's just that I was mentioning before, it just, even though that it's different, it feels kind of like cut and paste the same at some points. So yeah, James is played by Paul Terry. And once again, very similar to when we were discussing about Peter Ostrom, Samuel Irons, and Jason Fisher, he's a kid actor who only did like a handful of things, and then he quit the acting industry altogether. Nowadays, I think he's a math professor, and I think that he's like on Twitter or something where he talks about like his experiences working on James and the Giant Peach, and I think he also discusses about like other stuff. So there's that, and also once again with we were discussing about this in Roald Dahl's Little Red Riding Hood. We have Miriam Margoyles, who plays as Aunt Sponge, and you may know her for playing as Professor Sprout in the Harry Potter movies. That is our third actor who has been in a Roald Dahl adaptation, who later would be in eventually in a Harry Potter movie. We talked about Robbie Coltrane, then we talked about Julie Walters, and now we're talking about Miriam Margoyles. Don't worry, in about 5 minutes we'll talk about the fourth actor who would later be in a Harry Potter movie afterwards, but we'll get to that. So yeah, so essentially, Aunt Spiker and Aunt Sponge treat James like the servants. They're basically pushing him around to do all the chores, and he has no other choice but to do it. So he's essentially living like this poor, miserable life, and he's starving, and he essentially goes into his room and he sees his spider friend, This is where we get our first song in the movie called My Name is James. And oh man, the music in this movie, it is so Randy Newman.
Yeah, well, here's the thing about this, and this is a pattern you're going to notice throughout this feature. You can definitely point out the songs that aren't inspired by the books. You can definitely point those out. And the ones that Randy Newman has to basically use some kind of originality with the source material, you can tell that he's incapable of doing this. And so, I mean, here's the thing about this, like, and I'll talk about it as well. Randy Newman's songs, ever since You've Got a Friend in Me, seem to follow a particular type of rhythm. It's like a dum 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 dum, and then because you remember you remember Patricia when we were watching it together through one of the songs, and I think it was the one about
family,
about love, about family. We were singing You've Got a Friend in Me like on the top of the theme and ignoring completely the lyrics that are currently going on. So that's the problem you've got here with Randy Newman being the composer of this song. He really needed a consultant to kind of like guide him through, like probably writing something a bit more original than basically just rehashing You've Got a Friend in Me.
To be fair, this is 1996. This was a year after he did Toy Story. So I take it that because Toy Story became such a gigantic hit, I mean, even more than what Disney was doing at the time, they were like, oh man, we need to get a piece of that pie. We need to get Randy Newman to write our music because, hey, You Got a Friend in Me was a hit. Let's see if we can do it for this B project of James and the Giant Peach, because they were working on Hunchback of Notre Dame.
This might be a cruel comparison, and I'll happily take it in the comment section if that's the case. But look at Hans Zimmer. You can, when you listen to his music, they recently on Classic FM a couple of weeks ago, they did like a whole 2 hours of Hans Zimmer music, and you were listening all the way through, and you can tell that Hans Zimmer had an idea of basically where these where these characters and everything are all based, where you can definitely tell that there's a gladiator fight going on in Gladiator. You can definitely tell that there is a godly spirit that Moses has just come across in the burning bush, from the Prince of Egypt. With Hans Zimmer, you can tell that there is differing scenarios that are going on at play here. With Randy Newman, basically, you feel like you're just listening to the same thing over and over again in some cases. And again, don't get me wrong, there has been some times where he has done the occasional show tune where it has some kind of originality to it, but when you listen to like all the rest of the soundtrack in the middle, it kind of goes along the same kind of cookie cutter theme.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on this, Eli?
I still enjoy the We're Family song from the end, but I do get what you mean about the music sounding samey. In fact, that's actually kind of what makes the song in the middle stand out more, because it actually does come directly from the book.
That was the only song that Arun and I remembered.
Yeah.
Exactly, but the one about when they were eating like all the stuff in the peach, obviously that in itself is original, and also That's a Life for Me is quite in itself, and also it does kind of borrow from like the book of like saying, oh hey, look at all these other places we can go to. I mean, obviously that borrows from that, so I obviously digress on that, but you can definitely tell, and again I've just saying this just to wrap it up, any theme that he develops that comes from the book, you can tell. Anything that he has to originally come up with himself, you can definitely tell is borrowed from somewhere else.
Fair enough.
I will say, to the kid's credit, he's actually a decent singer.
Yeah, he is. Trust me. I mean, like, we've gone through our fair share of not very good actors in this Roald Dahl retrospective. I mean, Luke wasn't exactly acted very well, and neither was Bruno from The Witches. And Samuel Irons from Danny the Champion of the World, I can tell why this was the only movie he was ever in, and his brother essentially became the actor. So, I mean, at least we do have a pretty decent actor and a pretty decent singer from Paul Terry. Although there are at times where he kind of like, the way his speaking is, where, he kind of like tries to like be all very cutesy and optimistic. It was kind of like almost bordering like levels from Edmund from a Rockadoodle, but not that bad.
To be fair about the singing, like, with James Terry, like, he had to sound
Paul Terry.
youthful. Paul Terry. Yeah. He had to sound youthful, and he had to sound like, it was an innocent kid currently singing this song. Do you remember when Craig Bartlett on one of my Hey Arnold anniversary shows talked about how he had to convince Lane Torrent to like tone it down? Because, like, out of when he was singing one of the tunes, he was knocking it out of the park, and like that's not what they were going for with Arnold. And I think they had probably the same discussion here with James Terry, like saying, look, you're not, singing Jesus Christ Superstar. You're not singing, you're not on Broadway singing like the big hit. You're basically, a little boy who's currently, in this horrendous situation, who's not feeling very confident, who's feeling very timid. This is the way I want you to sing this song. And to be fair, he took instruction very well, and that's one thing I'll definitely say about our protagonist character here. The person who plays him, does play James quite authentically, and more authentically than probably some of our other child actors that we've had in the past.
That's true, yeah. I think so far he's been the best actor that we've seen since Peter Ostrom. So, yeah.
I will say that I do get what you mean about him trying to appear more cutesy, because I don't know if it's his accent or not, but at the end where he confronts the Cloud Rhino Dementor thing, he chases it away by saying that he's not afraid of it. But in some cases, it sounds like he's saying, "I'm not afraid of you."
Oh God, yes. That's true.
He had a bit. He was going for like what was his name from An American Tail.
Oh, Fievel.
Fievel. Yeah, he was going through a Fievel moment, I think, at that point as well, which I thought, in a way, when I thought back at it, was actually kind of hilarious, really. But obviously we'll get onto the Rhino scene a little later on. But let's continue with what we've got in a minute. So.
Yeah. Going to what you were saying before about actors having to tone down their singing so that they can sound authentic. For those who listen to We're in Between, the As Told by Ginger podcast I did a few years ago, when I had Aspen Vincent on the show, who played as Dodie Bishop, she was talking about a similar thing when they were doing the I Spy a Witch episode. That's the Halloween special. That when they had to sing the song, first they had to sing it as themselves. Then they had to sing it as their characters. Then they had to pretend to be bad on purpose, which is actually one of the most difficult things to do as a voice actor, especially if you are a professional singer. It is very difficult to pretend to sound yourself mixed with your character, mixed with singing on purpose but being authentic. So yeah, it's not easy for sure.
And to be fair, you can't blame her for being in that situation, because obviously being a voice actress or being a voice actor on TV is a hell of a lot different from having to be a performer in a broad in a musical, like on stage. Because in a musical you're expected to basically sing your heart out and expect to sing to the high degree. But when you're in a TV situation where you want your characters basically to have some sort of authenticity, in regards to being a relatable character, being a child on a kids show, then you can see the struggles that are in there. And I'd say we were probably very spoiled by many of our child actors from in the 90s, because they got it, because they were given the they told just to lay back and obviously to be relatable to the audience, and that generation of child actors, it was able to do that. And so I think that was a very professional thing that they were able to do.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so continuing on with the story. So James, he is going up into his room, and then he does that "My Name is James" song, and he does the coloring, and he blows. He takes the paper from the chips that he was scrounging the crumbs for, and he makes it into a balloon, and he flies it away, which would be copied off again in Danny the Champion of the World, where Danny would do the same thing, warning the people about, we're going to be kidnapping the pheasants, and we're going to be, distributing it to you so we can get revenge on Mr. Hazels. So with that happening, we have James and going to sleep, and then Ant Spiker and Ant Sponge are trying to kill the spider, and he helps it get free, and then we find the mysterious old man played by the late Pete Postlewaite, and he wants to make his dreams come true, and he gives him the lantern bag, and it's filled with crocodile tongues, and if he eats from it, then he can be able to have happiness, and he can go away from his miserable life.
I don't want to take the innocence, but when he was talking about, oh, you're feeling miserable, I've got something to cheer you up, he sounded like a drug dealer. I'm really sorry.
Okay, we're not going that far.
Also, it's kind of weird because in the movie, he doesn't tell James what to do with them. He just says they'll make his problems go away. He doesn't say to eat them like he does in the book, which I guess it was assumed. I'm not sure.
You're right, it doesn't.
Yeah, because I actually do remember rewatching the movie on Friday night and thinking that was weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like, what, is he going to eat them? Like, eventually he does, like, eat one of them, but, like, what was he, what was he going to do with them? Like, was he going to put them around the house or something like that? I'm not too sure, but obviously he falls over and the bag breaks open, they all bury themselves into the ground, and, obviously that sends up the peach tree to come back to life and then start growing a peach again. So
yeah. And of course, Ant Spiker and Ant Sponge take full advantage of it, and they decide that they're going to open up a venue where they're going to have, the biggest peach in the world showcased to the public, and they get to make a lot of money from it. And it's very akin to what happened in the book as well, that people want to look at it, people want to touch it, but then they can't because, that's going too far. But yeah, it becomes a huge hit. And
I have to say, there is one little joke that I didn't catch as a kid when they were letting people in to see the peach, and at one point, Ant Spiker is like, it's like the price is double for you, Father, and you can hear the priest saying, "May God forgive you."
Yeah. And the way, that they're going all over paparazzi and the news journalists about, like, oh, the giant peach and all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, they are milking this for all it's worth. And so then, James is all dressed up because he wants to see the children who came to see the peach, but it's nighttime already. And so they send James to clean up the garbage. And so, he's still really disappointed about what's going on. And then finally he sees the peach, he eats from it. The last crocodile tongue jumps in on the peach. And then all of a sudden we now switch over to stop motion throughout like the rest of the movie until the end, of course.
Yeah. I'm interested to see why they decided to kind of go that route. Like, you saw, like, I'm sorry to keep going back to, I know we keep going back towards the end of the movie, but I think this actually may be a legitimate complaint to say about the consistency in this movie, because, like, you have the ability to have the stop motion characters be interacting with the live action characters. Why wouldn't you not have just James be live action and have, and like just kind of like green or blue screen him in or something like that? And
well, that is an excellent question, Aaron, and that's an excellent question. And I actually have an article that discusses on why Henry Selick decided to do half stop motion, half animation. And I'll leave a link to it again. It's called digitalmediafx.com, where he discusses on why. It was because of production costs. And it says right here that he wanted originally to have it all live action, but he decided that he was going to do that because of production costs. He even said in an interview, stop motion has a great textural quality that CGI doesn't achieve. The wrinkles are there, and with it being handmade, it's a performance, and it has incredible charm. And because I guess maybe they didn't have like a large budget. I mean, it was like they only had like $38 million. So, trying to mix it in with stop motion and with live action, I guess they decided to even things out. So I guess maybe because of that, they were able to just play around with, whatever they had. And I guess maybe he wanted to stretch his creativity again after doing, Nightmare Before Christmas as well. So I think maybe that's the reason.
Okay. Well, again, it's, I think at least they tried to do it. They did a decent job with what they had. So I guess I can't complain too much. I guess I would say that the James stop motion figure They do kind of look a little weird when you look at him directly, but I mean, like they did a good job, I think, on the other characters. I mean, like I do like Mr. Centipede and Mr. Grasshopper and Mrs. Ladybug and all these other characters that they did. I think they did. I liked the designs, and so I think that's one positive I think we can give to this. And I guess I shouldn't have complained too much anyway about them because at the end of the day they're done by the same people who brought Nightmare Before Christmas back to life, and we know how much of a success that was.
Mm-hmm.
I just gotta say, when James first gets a big bite of the peach, I have to say, as somebody who grew up where peaches are common, that peach still looks amazing to me, with or without the crocodile tongue in it. And I think probably the thing that weirded me out the most as a kid, other than a sequence that's coming up later, is when James first enters the peach and the magic starts taking effect and his head grows huge to match his character design in the stop motion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now here's the thing. This is one of the other. I think this is probably one of the first of the animated Roald Dahl adaptations that is not using art directed by Quentin Blake. Now, for those who don't know, Quentin Blake has been a huge illustrator that has been drawing for pretty much every single Roald Dahl book for the past 30, 40 years. But no, they were actually using the art design by Lane Smith. And if you look at his original art drawings of the James and the Giant Peach book, it looks very similar to it. In fact, he was actually a conceptual artist in the movie. So I guess they decided to use the Lane Smith drawings of James and the Giant Peach as opposed to the Quentin Blake drawings, which would feature, especially in Revolting Rhymes, which we'll discuss about much later on.
Yeah, I had a lot of editions of Dahl's work that were illustrated by Quentin Blake, and it kind of amazes me that he stuck around as long as he did because he's got a very distinctive, very sketchy art style. It's not bad, but it's not something that you would expect to stick around for that long. I'm not trying to badmouth his work or anything. It does look good. Even as a kid, I still liked it. But when I first read James and the Giant Peach, because obviously the movie had just come out around that time, the version that I got was the version that was with the illustrations by Lane Smith. And I can say that Henry Selick actually did improve quite a bit on some of Smith's character designs, because I recall the glowworm looking fairly normal in the book, but in the movie they kind of made her into like this aging opera singer, which I really liked.
Yeah, definitely. I think it gave a little bit more personality when Glowworm in both the book and in the movie doesn't really do anything other than just glow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why they cut off the Silkworm character in the book, because she pretty much did nothing. There's that. So, yeah, I guess we can introduce the characters that James interacts with inside the Peach. So, yeah, there's Mr. Grasshopper, Mr. Centipede, Mr. Earthworm, Miss Spider, Mrs. Ladybug, and, of course, the Glowworm. So, yeah, I mean, we have the Grasshopper, who is definitely like the sophisticated, and the more articulate bug in this. And then we have the Centipede, who's kind of like a Brooklynite, who's, has this accent, and he says that he's traveled all over the world. And then we have the Ladybug, who's very motherly, and she's very sweet and kind and wants to help everybody. Then we have the Spider, who's very mysterious and quiet and very sassy. And then the Glowworm, she's deaf and she's old and she glows. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah. And then
the Glowworm. I mean, obviously, except having a physical presence on the screen, she didn't really do all that much, really.
Not really.
Think about it.
It's funny because I guess I didn't pay that much attention to the opening credits when I first saw this movie, because it was when I saw how they designed Miss Spider that I was like, was Burton involved in this? Because she looks like a fusion of the Spider character from the Beetlejuice cartoon and Beetlejuice himself, which definitely is not true to Lane Smith designs. In fact, Miss Spider is actually pretty motherly to James in the book. And they try to sort of give Miss Spider an arc, because in the movie, as in the book, she is the spider that James saved from Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker. But in the movie, they build up that she's also kind of a loner and people don't like her. And the other and the other creatures don't like her because, well, spiders eat insects. But it's an arc that is resolved rather quickly. The movie is a lot shorter than I remember it being as a kid.
Yeah, it is. With all of the introductions of the characters, I guess I'll quickly discuss about the voiceover. So, Mr. Grasshopper is voiced by Simon Cowell, a very well-known English actor and theater director and all that stuff. You probably know him for on theater, and you probably know him for a bunch of other productions as well. I'm sure that Aaron can probably, discuss about that. I guess, some of the movies that we probably know him from is like Amadeus and A Room with a View and Four Weddings and a Funeral. And then we have Richard Dreyfuss as the Centipede, who he was becoming really popular around the 90s. He had just did Mr. Holland's Opus, which was a huge hit, if I remember. And then there was David Thewlis as the Earthworm, and this is our second character who would later be in a Harry Potter movie, because he later on played as Professor Lupin. And it's kind of ironic that we have one character who starts off as this coward, and then he's supposed to be like, the brave Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, and he's a werewolf. Mm-hmm. So there you go. And one that surprised me was Susan Sarandon as Miss Spider. And I guess it kind of sounds like that because it almost sort of sounds like the performance she would kind of give for Coco in the Rugrats in Paris movie, except a lot less over the top, but just very, I can definitely tell with her voice inflections.
It makes you wonder when they were going through casting. They were like when they were looking for people to play in the Rugrats in the second Rugrats movie. They probably looked at probably the performance of Miss Spider and thought, oh hey, well we can put her in as Coco.
Yeah, because she's weird. She's weirdly French for some reason in this movie.
Yeah, exactly. And then we have Jane Leeves as Mrs. Ladybug, and you probably know her for Frasier and Hot in Cleveland. And then finally, Miriam Margoyles does a double casting as the Glowworm. Again, she doesn't really have that much to say, so yeah. So now that we're introduced with all of our characters, so they decide to cut the peach away, and it's gonna roll away, and they are able to become free from Ant Spiker and Ant Sponge. In the book, the moment that the peach rolls into Ant Spiker and Ant Sponge, they're dead. They don't come back at all.
Yeah, they flatten them Wile E. Coyote style, but people don't come back from that. So
yeah. Which I'm wondering if, keeping the ants alive, yay or nay in this movie?
Nay.
Nay.
Okay. Nay.
Okay.
I mean, now here's the thing. Now, I know our good friend James Sullivan, a.k.a. Jaime Toot from Pages of Pictures, he tried to give a defense on why to keep them alive, but I just found it to be kind of unnecessary. I just felt like, there has to be a big climax, but I just felt it wasn't needed.
I mean, you still could do it without them. The book did. I mean, don't get me wrong. They're meant to be cartoonishly evil. You love to hate these women. But it would be really funny to see Henry Selick flatten them out like paper dolls.
I would have loved to have seen it. And also another thing I would have loved to have seen that, was a drawing in the book that they never did in the movie was the scene in which when the peach rolled over to Willy Wonka's chocolate factory.
Well, it's not explicitly stated to be Willy Wonka's factory, but yes, the peach does roll through a chocolate factory and makes a chocolate flood all over the city.
I guess in defense of these two characters, I think one thing that we were all building up to, and I know some people are going to argue, well, he stood up to the rhino and he obviously saw through that, but then I think, but then we have the situation where he's not really stood up to the ants, and so maybe, I guess there is a justification to say, well, he's been through this whole adventure, and now the big payoff is going to be that he's going to finally stand up to his Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker and gain his independence. I think that, I guess you could say that that's probably what they were maybe aiming to build up to, I think, from the get-go, I think. And so I think there is. So I guess when you look at it from that point of view, I think there is a justification to kind of keep them going in the movie, because then you still got that tension there.
Except even in the movie, James still runs away from them at the end. And the insects are the ones who ends up solving the problem for him. Now, granted, they were coming at him with stolen fireman axes, so I'd probably run too, but still.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get to that scene later.
We could have had an alternative ending where James faced them head on. He ended up getting decapitated. So,
Look,
yeah.
Aaron. I know that Roald Dahl is dark and he tends to release these kind of strange moments, but we're not going that far.
I'm just saying, I know we're supposed to suspend our disbelief in these types of scenarios, but I still keep some kind of realism of basically what potentially what danger could happen to James, in this particular scenario.
Yeah, sure. All right, so continuing on, so we have, the Peach floating into the ocean, and they're wondering about, like, what are they going to do? They're going to be stranded in the middle of nowhere. And very similar to the book, they have the idea about, like, let's attach the Peach to hundreds and hundreds of seagulls so that they can be able to fly away and, go up into the air. And then we have the sharks attacking. And I have no idea why they decided to make it mechanical sharks.
Yeah.
I have to say, what timeline in the Terminator Skynet universe did this thing come from? It just I don't see the justification of making a giant mechanical shark. Who would go to the trouble to build that,
I can see it thematically. Tim Burton has a habit of bringing stuff back. He does a lot of double casting, like characters who were innocuous background characters at the start of his movies come back as villains later. And the thing is, I think that the mechanical shark is meant to resemble the oven that James got the fish heads out of at the beginning. Even if you can justify it somewhat in that regard, it is still a very weird scene.
I just don't think I can, Eli, because if you really think about it, I mean, in the world of The Nightmare Before Christmas, it probably would make sense because at the end of the day, it's Halloween Town and everything is supposed to scare you, But the shark in this instance, in this world, just feels out of place. It just feels like the James and the Giant Peach is somehow part of the Terminator universe, where there's Skynet decides to fill the ocean full of T-shark thousands or something like that, it just feels a bit really weird that we're seeing this type of thing. Now, here's the thing they could use as a kind of as a get out of jail for free card for that for me would be that if one of the crocodile tongues had hung onto the Peach and then fell off into the ocean and then they got eaten by a shark and then the shark turned into this thing. I could see from that point of view, oh yeah, that's the reason why the shark is now, far more menacing, because it's doing that kind of thing. I don't know. It's kind of in a way, it kind of feels like we're borrowing from Hellheimer Fish. Go that route with it. We give some kind of explanation for why there's a mechanical shark going around eating fish and then trying to kill our heroes.
Or it could have just escaped from Willy Wonka's factory.
Exactly. All of it, if we were to follow from the book, it's like the chocolate factory that the Peach rolled in and then boom, shark coming in.
Can you imagine the amount of sanctions that they probably put on Willy Wonka's factory to let that roam around in international waters?
Willy Wonka wouldn't care.
The thing is, in the book, it's just a swarm of regular sharks that attack the Peach for God knows what reason. But the thing is, it's honestly kind of funny, because when they get out of the ocean, Miss Spider goes under to examine the damage, and it turns out the sharks couldn't really bite the Peach, because a shark's face is flat, and you can't really bite something that's round, so much bigger and rounder than you effectively. So,
I think his whole method, was basically to harpoon the Peach and always take chunks out of it. Maybe I think that's probably what he was going for.
In the movie, definitely, but I'm talking about in the book. And I think that the comparison that he used was, imagine a small dog trying to get its teeth into a very large ball, and then you'll get the picture. So.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. So, okay, I can kind of suspend my disbelief in why they decided to do a mechanical shark as opposed to a real shark. Maybe they didn't have the budget to do a swarm of real sharks, and they wanted to probably do maybe one or two mechanical sharks to bring the point across. So that's fine.
I just say you needed an additional scene where a crocodile tongue fell in the water and got eaten by a shark, and that would explain everything. And then obviously they could just go around and beating the shark. They just what's that going to be 5 seconds of film? You can't go over 5 seconds of running time. Like, come on.
I think they were just trying to add a second action sequence because there are really only two big action sequences in this movie, and that's the first one. So,
and then there's another one, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, I guess I can understand why they decided to go into that route. So, yeah, we have the mechanical shark and the projectile piranhas and the harpoon trying to take down the Peach for reasons. They string the seagulls to let them fly away, and then finally they were able to escape. And this is when we learned that their main destination was going to be in New York City. Now, in the book, their destination was never clear. They just wanted to get away from Aunt Spiker and Aunt Sponge as quick as possible. So the reason why they ended up in New York City in the first place was because the Peach eventually landed on top of the Empire State Building, which at the time was the tallest building in the world. I can assume that this is definitely like 1930s, 1940s, because you can tell by the car, you can tell by the buildings and the setup. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was like taking place around that time. I mean, like, as for like time periods and all that kind of stuff, I mean, the only one that I know of for sure is Danny the Champion of the World, where it took place in the early 50s. The Witches took place in the early 80s. And I think that with all the other ones, they're kind of interchangeable. So I guess it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Anyways,
at one point I was a little bit confused about the timeline when things were going on, because they don't really tell you. I think in the movie basically when about this is actually supposed to be taking place. So I mean, you are kind of like left guessing. Like you almost kind of feel like it almost kind of felt like I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Quentin Tarantino short film Death Proof, where you think you're in like a particular type time frame, and then all within like the 60s or something like that, and then all of a sudden one of the characters brings out an iPod, and like then you kind of feel like, oh hey, well what when is this supposed to take place? I kind of have the I kind of call it Death Proof syndrome, when you kind of like you have a movie where you're sort of having to kind of guess your way through what era you're basically currently experiencing at the moment. And so, like, I mean, it would like maybe just kind of like putting a stamp at the very beginning sequence, like saying, this, present day 1940 or something or other, like, like something like that, and just to give people kind of a clue in of basically where they are at the moment.
I don't know. Okay, so continuing on, then we have the best song in the movie, where we have, them singing about how the Peach is going to be, giving them substance and food throughout their entire journey. And this is obviously taken from the Roald Dahl, poem that he written in the book. And, they would, there'll be a handful of times in which they would do this in movies. Like we already talked about how, the Oompa Loompa song, the lyrics would be used in the 2005 Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and even like lines for like other things would be kind of like sprinkled in. So yeah, I mean, again, I think that this is the best song in the movie because it's so Roald Dahl. You can tell by the way that the lines like flow with each other really nicely, and it's just so whimsical and so crazy, and it's just so lively and bouncy, where everything has just been so like really calm and melodramatic with the other songs that are going to be playing on. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. And also, the way that the stop motion is with all the characters bouncing around and having fun and all the things that they did with the Peach was actually really enjoyable. I can tell that they put a lot of work into it. So let's talk about something that was cut from the book and then what was replaced with. So in the book, they were supposed to be like going up so high that they were interacting with cloud people. But then the Centipede said something very inappropriate, and then the cloud people essentially like lashed out and became really angry, and there was a severe windstorm. They decided to replace it where they went off course and they need to have a compass so they can go back on the right track. And they find out that Mr. Centipede was lying about him traveling all over the world, and he decides to make up for his mistakes by swimming underwater to grab a compass. I mean, I could somewhat forgive the mechanical sharks, but this one, I'm sorry, I cannot suspend my disbelief with that. They would have been dead immediately. I mean, it's freezing water. We can assume they're probably around like Newfoundland or Greenland or something. So yeah, I mean, like, I don't know how well centipedes can swim in freezing water and hold their breath for that long, but I mean, even
none
with
of the characters seem to have a problem with holding their breath in this scene.
Yeah, even James is able to go underwater in freezing temperatures without dying from frostbite or anything like that. So yeah, I'm sorry, my suspension of disbelief is completely gone.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Maybe they could. Well, it's just the magic of the crocodile tongues, I guess. I think that's just how they.
Sure, let's give it that. Yeah, crocodile tongues apparently not only turn you into stop motion cartoon characters, but can also make you hold your breath and not suffer from freezing to death. Yeah, sure,
hey, at least
whatever.
it's still more explainable than Queen Elsa's ice powers.
Well, I guess. Another cameo that we have to point out is that Jack Skellington is in this movie as a pirate.
Yeah, and I guarantee you this scene, this whole thing, I guarantee you has basically just been so that Jack Skellington basically get his cameo.
And Donald Duck.
And Donald Duck, apparently, yeah. But, this whole thing, I mean, if it wasn't for Jack Skellington, I don't think it would have even existed. I don't think. That's just me.
Yeah, I think they really wanted to throw in another adventurous climactic event because, I guess maybe they either couldn't do the cloud people scene, maybe they were having difficulties like trying to do the stop motion effects, or maybe they thought it wasn't interesting. I'm not sure. I mean, your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah.
But I actually did enjoy it, even though that it was kind of nonsensical. I mean, I did enjoy the fight sequence, even though that, again, that definitely wouldn't have happened. And then we even have like a scene
kind of more video gamey, if anything. Like he's like, oh, we got to get this compass. Oh, we got to go through this whole dungeon and all get this compass. Like it's like Legend of Zelda a little bit, really.
Yeah, I'm surprised that this part of the movie was never referenced in a Kingdom Hearts game.
Yeah.
Like, I think if the movie would have done better, I think that we would have seen James and the Giant Peach in Kingdom Hearts. That is, if the Roald Dahl Foundation would have allowed it.
Well, who knows? Like, if they keep making Kingdom Hearts games, I think we might see it one day.
Maybe. You might have a point. The journey continues on, and then we finally have our final confrontation with the rhinoceros. Well, it's not really the rhinoceros. It's a figment of James's mind, where they're really close to New York City, but it's essentially like, his last opportunity to stand up for his fears and to tell him that he's not afraid of anything and he's not afraid of the thing that killed his parents. So he essentially has this triumphant moment in here, and then it would lead up towards when he lands in New York City and where Aunt Spiker and Aunt Sponge drive across the Atlantic Ocean to pick up James and to claim their peach again, suspending of disbelief. And, at first, I thought that they were kind of rational. It's like, oh, we've came to collect the boy and we've came to collect our peach. And they were showing off proof that they had the paper showing that they were his legal guardians. And then they showed the picture from the photographer that they owned the peach. So everything looked right. And then he starts spouting out, oh, but the crocodile, I had crocodile tongues from this old guy. And then there was the spider and the grasshopper and all that stuff. And then they're like, really, James, I mean, you have no concrete proof, while your aunt actually showed proof that they were telling the truth. So it's like, yeah, you're spouting craziness. I mean, it's like, yeah, how are you going to be able to pull off that you're telling the truth and, all that kind of stuff. And then they start going completely insane by grabbing the firemen's axes and try to cut them in pieces like psychopaths.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, so finally it's shown that James is telling the truth, and that we have the bugs coming into the rescue, and that James was able to, I don't know, for some reason, legally live on his own in Central Park in a giant peach pit, I guess with the bugs. And the bugs are off doing various things. I think that in the book, it's completely different in some parts. Like, I know that it was saying that, Earthworm had invented like some sort of like face cream or something, and that Glowworm was working with the Statue of Liberty. I think one of the changes that they did was that in the book where Ladybug was married to a fireman, they decided to change it into Ladybug is a nurse and she helped deliver the 10,000 baby or something. And then, Centipede, became like this huge sensation. But in the book, I think it was talking about like shoes. Like, I think there was like a recurring thing with shoes in the book where in one scene, James had to like massage the foot of all 1,000 feet of the centipede, which was weird.
In the movie, Mr. Centipede ran for mayor of New York City. So, like...
yeah.
Whether he won,
I guess it's
better.
I guess it's better than being a shoeman. Sure. And I think that everybody else, they still kept to the same thing. So, yeah, that's essentially it, where, essentially, like, the old man works as our narrator, and he tells about, like, James lived happily ever after, and he was never unhappy again. So, yeah, and the one thing that Aaron and I never knew about when we were watching this was, like, if we watch all the way toward the end credits, there's a scene in which where there was like some sort of arcade game where you got to play like this spiker and sponge game where you got to, like, if you hit it correctly, you got to garner points. Yeah, like that was there for no reason whatsoever. It's not like, in like the Marvel Cinematic Universe in which, like, oh, if you wait through the credits, it hints at something else coming or it hints at a funny character. It's just nothing. Like, it was just one thing that was there and that's it.
What would it be hinting toward in that case? Like, what would be the next Roald Dahl adaptation to come out? Like, they'd already done. Would the Twitch show up in the background or something? Would they see the? Would they see the?
Nah, it wasn't. Would they see the? It literally was just like it was just like the arcade game. He basically just said game over, and then he basically went to the Disney logo, and that was pretty much it.
Would they see the enormous crocodile or something?
Oh, you know what? The enormous crocodile would have been... I think it would have been so appropriate if the enormous crocodile would have been there. Hey, where's Henry Sugar? Where's George and his marvelous medicine? Where's any of the other characters? The them running over the chocolate factory. Maybe we would have had a credit scene in which when Willy Wonka was trying to call his insurance company saying, my chocolate factory was destroyed, and it's like, how? Oh, a giant peach rolled over it, and they're laughing at him, and then he just tells his Oompa Loompas, let's just fix it up, I guess. So that would have been fun.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would really enjoy. I mean, I think they would have probably have done that today if they were like planning to do like a Roald Dahl cinematic universe, kind of like the same way they do with the MCU. Like if they had something like that, I'm pretty sure like there would be reoccurring characters like in particular roles. But right now, I don't think they have any plans to do that. But if James and the Giant Peach was like in that type of situation, I guarantee you they'd probably be sticking all sorts of things in the credits. But I think that was about nothing. But mind you. We literally just got to New York City. We basically just they did all that stuff, and then we got the aunts getting their comeuppance, and that was it really. So.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of funny because even though most people know it more for being a thing because of the MCU, it didn't start with that because Disney did. Because I remember back when Disney did Return to Oz. There were cameos from a lot of other Oz characters from the other Oz books that they knew they weren't going to get the rights to adapt, so they just stuck as many cameos as possible in there.
That's true. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do have a point, for sure. All right, so that was James and the Giant Peach, so everyone give your final verdicts.
It's another Tim Burton creation, really, and... It's it's like I guarantee it's probably not my favorite Roald Dahl movie. I'll be honest with you. I still feel like the BFG probably like from 1989 is probably still my favorite Roald Dahl movie right now. But James the Giant Peach is a Tim Burton classic, and if you're a massive Tim Burton fan, I'm sure you'll get some kind of enjoyment out of it. But me and myself, I don't think it'll be option number one. I'll definitely tell you that.
James and the Giant Peach, like Matilda or Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, is one of those iconic Dahl adaptations that I grew up with, so it kind of holds a special place in my heart. Yeah, it has problems, but I can never hate this movie or even dislike it. So, yeah, I do recommend it.
I do recommend it as well. It's definitely a lot better than 4 Rooms, that's for sure. Oh, God. But yes, I do recommend it as well. I think that it does have flaws, but I think it's able to make up with its charm. I think that the charm of Tim Burton and Henry Selick and Randy Newman, as well as with Roald Dahl himself, I think was able to culminate into something really magical. And, it definitely has the Roald Dahl tropes, I guess you can call it. It does have the optimistic yet timid kid. It does have the weird situations that can only be caused by a little bit of magic. It has the epic adventure. It does have the scary moments. I mean, we didn't even talk about the trippy Monty Python dream that James has later in the film.
Yeah.
So
that was the sequence that gave me nightmares as a kid that I was going to bring up. Even though now it looks kind of silly, it terrified me when I watched it when I was a kid. So,
I'm just glad it's at the point where we're referencing Monty Python's Flying Circus and not Angelina Anaconda.
Oh God, no. Yeah, but I think that for the most part, it's definitely, I mean, like the ones that came out during the 90s of Roald Dahl adaptations is definitely one of the better ones for sure. As if it's my favorite, I mean, I would probably have it as possibly around my top 5, but like anything else that I have yet to see, I'm not sure, because I still, there was a lot of other adaptations that I have yet to see, so I'm still going to keep to my motions, but it definitely is a very enjoyable one. So alongside with movies such as Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and the BFG, James and the Giant Peach is definitely a really good recommendation to check out if you're a Roald Dahl fan. I mean, granted, it does have its issues, but it is still a very enjoyable watch. And it's a shame that this movie flopped in the box office, because I think that it's very enjoyable, and I'm glad that it's getting the cult following that it does have.
Mm-hmm. But mind you, I think at the time, I mean, one thing that I will find very surprising is that, I mean, I would really love to have seen what else was on that weekend when it opened up, and to figure out, I mean, was it just an unfortunate situation where, it got sandwiched in with other movies that were just being released at the time and people would rather have gone to see them than go to see this? I mean, was that just the way that it just kind of panned out? Because, the reviews were great at the time, and, and there was a lot of celebrity that was piled into this movie too. Joanna Lumley is not an actress that you knock or say you put to the side. There was plenty of people in there who you definitely would want to go see in a theatrical release, and so I'm just really surprised that at the time it just didn't perform, and I would really love to see what the circumstances were behind that.
From what I can tell, there really weren't a lot of other major releases around that time.
Yeah,
it was basically just that.
Yeah, and as mentioned before, there were only 4 animated movies that came out: Hunchback of Notre Dame, Space Jam, Beavis and Butthead Do America, and this. And 5th, if you want to count the Doraemon movie in Japan, but we're not doing that. But yeah, I mean, it was a pretty lackluster year for animated movies in theaters. There was practically nothing. So yeah, I'm surprised that it didn't do very well. And I mean, I guess that maybe Disney really wanted to do more, but because it flopped, they would wait 20 years until they do the BFG. And I know the BFG did pretty decently as well. And as of right now, Netflix has the rights to do the Roald Dahl adaptations.
Okay, but apologies whilst I actually looked this up whilst I was looking at this. Okay, the month that James and the Giant Peach came out, this is basically what it was up against. Tessis, The Substitute, The Quest, and Mulholland Falls.
Must have been a sucky month for movies then. Maybe they did other things. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm really surprised. Those were the 5 movies that were in theaters at the time, and James and the Giant Peach was not apparently was not a big enough name to kind of carry that month.
I mean, as mentioned before, James and the Giant Peach was banned in various books and libraries, so maybe there weren't a lot of kids who knew about it. I don't know. Final words: James and the Giant Peach is a very enjoyable movie. Does it have its problems? Of course it does. But I think that if you look into it, I think that you will find a very sweet and magical experience. I do recommend that you do check this out. It's on Disney Plus for Americans. As for people like Aaron in Europe, it's not, but I'm sure that it will eventually. But you could get it on YouTube and various other streaming sites for a few dollars. All right, so that is it for this episode of the Roald Dahl Retrospective. Eli, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem.
So please, why don't you plug and promote your stuff?
Instead of doing that, I actually have something a little bit different in mind, because I don't think that there's an adaptation of this, but I mentioned it before, and I kind of want to talk about another Roald Dahl story that didn't get an adaptation called The Enormous Crocodile. For those who haven't read it, it's a very short story from Dahl, and I mostly got it because I was sort of trying to collect his work as a kid. And it mostly just deals with a crocodile going around terrorizing people, other people and animals. But it has one of the greatest endings I've ever read, because basically all the other animals get fed up with the crocodile's bullshit, and the elephant takes the crocodile, spins him around his head, and throws him into space, where he gets burned up in the sun.
Yes.
It is amazing, and you should definitely read it.
Yes, you should. I mean, who knows? If this Netflix deal goes really well, we might see adaptations of the shorts. Who knows?
I guess I'll end on a different note as well to finish with the theme. Apparently, I've recently been told that the cult movie Rock and Roll apparently has appeared on YouTube.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Awesome. But yes, as always, I'll leave Eli's links in the description box below for you to check him out. All right, so that is it, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Tune in next time, as we're going to be discussing about another Roald Dahl adaptation that came out in the same year that was a financial failure, but it was critically acclaimed, and it became a huge phenomenon. We're going to be talking about Matilda.
So until then, we will see you all later.
All right, take care.